Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you are doing well, staying safe, taking care of those closest to you, and hope you're excited, finding some excitement on my new thing is to pursue joy and to be joyful. So that is my mission. That is what I am sticking to. Let me give a shout out. By the time this airs, it will have been my friend Chris Migliaccia's 40th birthday. So happy birthday, man. You folks know him from his appearances on the show, as well as the work I do with him on the sketch group Backdoor Barbecue. So happy birthday, man. Looking forward to another number of great years and good times. Folks, I find myself on a precipice of becoming not athletically inclined, but like I've been trying to. I have very realistic athletic goals. I want 2X shirts to fit well. That's my very reasonable goal, and then my pie in the sky for fitness is I want to be able to go back to Universal Studios Orlando and fit on some of those rides I did not get onto the last time. So that is my sort of like my carrot. I'm looking at it sort of like a Chariot of Fire situation, is getting that green safety bar when I get back on some of these rides. Maybe not all of them. Maybe not the ones where height appears to be a clear issue, but I want to try and make that happen. So I've been biking somewhat regularly every single day the past couple of weeks, and trying to eat just a touch differently. So we'll see where I could be, but I know I'm on a precipice of something because not only did I some folks who listen to the show know I'm a big fan of soccer. So not only am I now getting like the training kits that like the Arsenal players wear before they get on stage, like the ones that have the little thumb hole. But now I've got I'm gonna get I got the matching pants, so I can really just full on look like the part of like a chunky biker. So that's sort of my look. Not so much the motorcycle, not in a tough way, but just in a hey, I can bike somewhat regularly. That's what I've been focused on lately. And on the show today, I'm very excited for this to share this with you, because this was a really fun conversation. My guest on the show today is comedian Ariel Elias. Ariel's a comic in New York that I've known for a few years. Recently, you may have become aware of her due to a viral clip of a heckler throwing a full beer can at her while she was on stage, handling it like an absolute boss, picking up the beer and then drinking it, which has seamlessly, which went crazy viral. Like this video, I remember everybody talking about it. I remember seeing it go everywhere, which led to her recent appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live, and has parlayed into the next level of her stand-up career. And we had never really like sat down and talked like a lot of comics. Like you think you know people because you spend a lot of time with them or you do shows with them, but I really realized recently that I don't. And so this was a fun one. There's a lot of great like comedy talk and shop talk specifically. So I'm very much looking forward to sharing this with you guys. Ariel is a great comic, and this was a really interesting conversation that I can't wait to share with you. If you folks enjoyed this podcast and think you know a friend who would be interested in listening to this as well, you folks are my biggest supporters as far as like getting the word out there that this is a cool podcast for cool people. You can send them to awesomedisaster.com, has links to everywhere you can get the show. And in my recent readings on what pleases our algorithmic overlords, as that is helpful in this day of creating things for people to enjoy on the internet. Specifically, I know for Apple Podcasts, maybe some of the others, listening activity and subscriptions new subscriptions. So if you are listening and you haven't subscribed, you want to click that subscribe button for me. That would really be a huge help. And I would be tremendously appreciative as well. And I appreciate you being here and checking this show out. So let's get into it and talk to Ariel Elias. You're playing Magooby's Joke House in Baltimore soon, right?
Yeah.
That's the first comedy club I ever performed at, like years and years ago. I love that place.
Are you from Baltimore?
That's where I started. I grew up in Southern Maryland, so about like an hour south of Baltimore, but I went to college in Baltimore County. And when I started doing stand up in college, like it's like the a theater class. The first comedy club like where I did like a new talent showcase was Magooby's.
That's so cool. Wait, and you started stand up with a class?
Yeah, I was a theater major, and as part of like the theater training in my senior year, there was like a comedy class, and it covered like improv, like clowning, and then there was a little section on stand up, and then that's how I found out I enjoyed stand up. And I just kind of kept found an open mic and kept doing it from there. But it's very cool to see. Do you know who's gonna? Do you have an opener for that show?
It's gonna be oh gosh, what's his name? Hold on. Justo. Do you know him?
Oh, I don't know if I do.
He's a Baltimore guy. I met him at Church of Satire in Hanover, Pennsylvania. Have you done that room?
I have not done that room. No.
It's these guys in Hanover, Pennsylvania who I think the venue, it used to be a church, so it still has like all the church pews. It seats maybe 50 people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, you make no money. They don't have a room for you, but they care so much about comedy and stand up and making it fun that like it's just like it's the best and it's fun. And I met him there. Um, have you been back to Magooby's since you moved to New York?
A couple times. It's been a while, but what you were describing just then, those are like the experiences that like we want when we when we start doing comedy. And like it, especially I feel like in New York, like you have so many years of just being treated horribly, and then you get to have all these great experiences, and it's kind of reminds you of the magic of this thing.
Yeah, well, in the Church of Satire place, it was the first place I ever headlined.
Oh,
So
cool.
it has a real special place in my heart because they know what they are, like they know what that club is, and they know that they can't like afford very much, but so they don't care that I wasn't a draw at all
Mm-hmm.
and was like learning how to do this. But yeah, when you're like just the owners of it care about you as a human being and as a comedian,
Mm-hmm.
um is it's sad that that's refreshing, but a lot of times on the road it is.
Oh my God! I can only imagine because I want to trace this back a little bit because you're like imagine now you're at this place like you're starting. Are you just now like starting to headline like somewhat bigger rooms, or have you been headlining for a while?
I was headlining small rooms starting last year, and then yeah, now starting in December of 2022 I've started headlining like big rooms.
Gotcha. Which is very cool because I remember, and I don't know if this is I'm excited that you remember me because I think the last time I saw you was at might have been at the Pit Underground. Uh,
Oh.
and I can't remember the exact show. I think it was like one of those like comic versus comic kind of things that we got paired up in the first round of something like
I
that.
remember that.
Um, I'm sad that room is gone now. It's only the pit loft is left after the pandemic. But that was like that was like the closest to like an actual comedy club spot that the pit had.
Yeah, I remember that show. It's always hard when you're like, hey, this really fun subjective art that you do? Let's make it a competition and pit you against somebody.
I know. It
Um,
it drives me nuts. Did you ever do the like comic strip live auditions back when there was like a panel that was mean to you after your set?
No, the closest I ever came, I did go and stand in that line once. And
Uh-huh.
after about 2 hours, I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't, whatever this will lead to, I don't want to sleep outside. And I went
Mm-hmm.
home. That's the closest I ever came.
Yeah, I think your instincts are right in that, because I must have done it, like stood in that line like 3 times over the course of a couple years before I did a couple of late night spots, and then, like, of course the booker changes right after that. But I
Yeah,
remember
every time.
yeah, and I remember the first time doing it, going up, and I was still like very deadpan when I would be on stage. I hadn't learned to like kind of talk like this on stage. And I remember just Dante Nero and Modi just saying like incredibly hurtful things to me, and like just really like eviscerate, like not just my jokes, but like my performance and the way I look. It was, I don't know if that helped me become a better comedian. I'm not sure
I
what
did
purpose
just
it served.
I did just have a recovered memory. So I never did the comic strip live one, but I did do the stand up New York competition that they had. I don't know how many years they did it, but it was like on a Wednesday at 4 p.m.
Ooh.
So with 100 comedians or whatever, and then it was bracketed, so you would go up against each other and then keep moving on. And I made it to the final five, and the final five was it. It was also, you would go up, you would do your set, nobody in the audience, just a panel.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I remembered is Dante Nero was also on my panel. It was him, Yamanika, Candy Claire, and maybe somebody else. Maybe it was Amy Hawthorne. But they would then, while you stood on stage in front of only the other competitors, would give you feedback on your set, and it was awful.
Uh-huh.
It's because you're like, I don't know, maybe with singing it's a little different. Like when you watch these competition shows, stand up is such a vulnerable act, I think, because you're giving yourself away. Like these are your
Yeah.
personal like thoughts and feelings, and it's such a big piece of you that to then have that critiqued in front of your peers is like soul sucking and traumatizing. And the only thing that made it better was knowing, and worse, was knowing everybody else was about to go through the same thing.
Right, right.
So it made me at least like much kind, like the first time I was like, when we realized what was happening,
Mm-hmm.
you have that feeling of like, oh, thank God that's not me. And then you realize like, that's going to be me.
Yeah, that's about to be me in like 10 seconds. I would almost prefer like getting booed off stage at the Apollo to like a very specific critique of everything that is wrong, because you're absolutely right. Stand up, and even me, and especially like stand up, like the kind that you do when you're talking about like yourself and your upbringing, you're doing like very personal stuff as opposed to like some kind of like character or caricature where you can blame it on
Right.
that. It feels like so much more of a personal rejection. It's like a I am flawed.
Yes. And I think like we were heavily trauma bonded after that. Everybody who lost. It was me, Caitlin Palufo, Jeff Sheen, and Maddie Smith.
Uh-huh.
Um, and from then on, we were like, well, we know and love each other for the rest of our lives now
It,
because of this.
let's remember this, hopefully in better times years down the road.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, it really did. It is funny, like in stand up, you have these terrible experiences, and the only thing that gets you through them a lot of times is knowing, like, this will be a story one day.
oh yeah.
One day we'll laugh.
Oh my God, exactly. And very recently, and of course, because you're much more than this viral clip that's happened in the last few months. But yeah, especially like, just one day we can look back on this and laugh. Which is, I think, sort of, again, one of those things I love about stand up is the like defanging of pain,
Mm-hmm.
in kind of a lot of ways. I want to ask you this kind of about growing your upbringing a little bit. So to give you a little bit of insight into me, you're married, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is your husband Jewish? Just out of curiosity.
He is, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not Jewish, but my wife is, and being from a part of Maryland that feels very southern, um, her Judaism is a very much a focal point whenever she's around my family, and kind of not exactly problematic ways, but like just bumbling. And I was kind of curious growing up in Kentucky if that rang true to you in any way.
Yeah, definitely. Wait, and where is your wife from?
She's from Brooklyn, born and raised.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so she's also not used to her Judaism ever being the focal point. Because in Brooklyn, like everybody's Jewish.
Right, exactly. Like big city, and then she comes to my hometown, which is not even a town; it's a census designated place, and it's literally like I remember the first like holiday season, like just like the idea of like Hanukkah was like, or like because I remember we brought a menorah and we're like lighting candles in my parents' house, in my mom's house. She's like, and my mom was kind of like, okay, like not explicit, but you could tell it was just a foreign concept, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Wait, and did you grow up religious at all?
Fairly, not like super strict, but like I was taken to church for a good portion of my life. Yeah,
Which kind?
Episcopalian. So like,
Oh, okay. So
so
pretty
like,
cool.
yeah, so like the kind of like the fun aunt of Catholicism is, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
So where I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. So it's not as
Okay.
if there were zero Jews. Like there are two synagogues, one Reform, one conservative. I went to the conservative one. But in my high school of however many kids, like 1,400 kids,
Mm-hmm.
2,000 kids, there were only two Jewish people. It was me and one other girl.
Oh man.
So a lot of places you would go, you would be the only Jewish person there,
Mm-hmm.
unless that place that you were going was the synagogue. Um, but it felt like a lot of my friends had a lot more curiosity about it than like animosity.
Sure.
So I mean, I remember I like one of my favorite memories is like I think I was 16 or 17. Me and a bunch of my friends went ice skating because there was like nothing else to do. Uh, and afterwards, my friends were hungry, and it happened to be Hanukkah time. And I was like, "Come over, and my mom's making latkes."
Uh huh.
And nobody knew what that was, and I was just like, "It's hash browns, like you'll like it." And I just brought, nine of my friends over, and my mom was thrilled because I think also a big part of being Jewish in a place where there aren't very many is not just like everybody's gazing upon you and that is the one thing about you. It also becomes the thing that you want to share with everybody because you
Mm-hmm.
become a representative of that thing.
Oh no, I can understand that absolutely. My wife's family growing up had what they called the latke blowout, which is a tradition that we've continued on now that we host our own Hanukkah celebrations. It's where you make enough latkes for 8 nights and you eat them in one. It's like a the reverse miracle. But no, especially like yeah, 100%. You become sort of like the conduit through which someone can kind of connect with like this cultural force that's they don't have any experience with.
Yeah, and then you
Totally.
have to become very knowledgeable about your own religion and culture, even if that's not necessarily what you
Mm-hmm.
wanted to learn about, because everybody's going to ask you questions about it. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
it was to a point. I mean, my nickname in high school was Jew, but like in a nice way,
Uh
not
huh.
in a not in an accusatory way.
Right. Just like a
And
slightly
when,
different inflection.
yeah, Jew, not like Jew.
Right. Right. Totally. And Lexington. I don't know Kentucky super well. I know Louisville is supposedly like the cool city. I just know
Yeah,
that because the Laughing Derby's there.
yeah.
And what's Lexington like comparatively to the rest of Kentucky?
Lexington is the horse capital of the world, first and foremost.
Nice.
It's where UK is, the University of Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
So if UK wasn't there, that town would look very different. And it also looks really different now from what it did when I was growing up. When I was growing up, it really felt just like a college town.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a sushi restaurant opening and my parents being like, we have to eat here every week because we want this place to stay open. Now, I think like there's one thing that happened is in, I think 2007, Lexington became the host for the World Equestrian Games, which is like the
Mm-hmm.
Olympics of horse events.
Right.
And that put like a lot of money into revitalizing downtown and like trying to create an art scene and things that didn't just center around the university. And that has like caused the city to grow quite a bit. So
Mm-hmm.
now when I go back home, there's like stuff to do, which there never was when I was growing up.
Oh.
So it looks very different now than it did then.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's like it's super Christian. It's it votes blue usually, but it's like the way I put it was all of my friends were Christian, but it always felt a lot more like they actually practiced what they preached. So like,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I mean it's Kentucky still. So there's a lot of Bible thumping, a lot of evangelicals. My first job was at this clothing store called Christopher and Banks, which is like clothing for old women
Uh-huh.
mostly. It's like super conservative dress. So we would get old women in there, and then we would get a ton of Pentecostals.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That that's fascinating. Fascinating to me. I'm glad there are at least some like people that like uh actually lived what they say though. You're
That was my experience. I also like never understood the stereotypes about Jewish people like being like, you know, controlling media and stuff because
mm-hmm.
all of the Jews I knew were just college professors.
Right. Exactly. I did. I'm trying to think because like where I grew up, I don't think I met anyone who was Jewish until I got to college, and then I lived so specifically where I went to school.
Me neither.
I went to Towson University. I bet in Kentucky. And then so like you have Pikesville, which is a pretty heavily Jewish area, and Baltimore County. Your parents see. I'm so I that comment about this sushi restaurant. I know that means I would get along with your parents fairly well. What did they do growing up when you were growing up?
My mom is a social worker. She's a
Uh-huh.
clinical social worker, and my dad is an English professor.
Interesting. So like hip people doing good work
Oh
for
yeah, my
for
parents
the world.
were also hippies. Like they're from New Jersey and then lived in New York and then San Francisco and then Kentucky.
Interesting. And did you ever ask them what it was about Kentucky that drew them there?
It was that my dad was offered a job there. That was really it.
That's good enough reason for me. And did you have siblings growing up?
I have an older brother.
Older
Yeah.
brother. Okay. So younger sister. And so so you're growing up in Lexington, and were you like a nerdy kid? Were you an athlete? What was like the breakfast club trope you fell into?
Okay, I was nerdy, but I wasn't a good student until high school.
Mm-hmm.
But before then, I was a really bad student. Um, I was like quiet. I liked to keep to myself. All the sports that I did were like individual sports. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was into like swimming. That was my main thing.
Cool.
I was in band. I was a real band kid. I went
Nice.
to yeah, I went to a music camp every summer where my dad taught at EKU. I went to Stephen Foster Music Camp. Um,
What did you play?
I played saxophone.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, those were like the kids who I probably fit in with the best. Were like the band kids. But
Mm-hmm.
my high school is like my high school was never like a stereotypical high school at all. It was it wasn't like that clicky, I don't think. So everybody kind of like mingled with everybody. I also went to a high school that was like I think it was like majority black, and then also had like the largest ESL population,
Mm-hmm.
English as a second language. So it just
Yeah.
didn't like fit like your typical like here's what I think high school looks like.
Gotcha. It almost sounds like it kind of reflected like the real world a little bit more.
I guess so. I mean, it's hard to say because I think everybody can kind of make their world look however they want it to look for the most part, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it felt like it felt like a lot of people who the system was not set up for were all put together in a school, and because of that you don't conform to the system as much.
Gotcha. Like it's
Does that
just
make sense?
no, yeah, it does. Like, let me see if I can kind of paint like a word picture here. Like, there's these kind of like slots that uh everyone is kind of expected to fit into, and then they could just sort of like, oh well, if you're not that, then you go over here. We haven't
Right.
quite figured it out yet. Um,
It kind of felt like the Real World season of Rejects
uh-huh.
in Hawaii.
Right,
that
right.
that's how like it just a little less alcoholism at our school, but it just kind of felt like we're all here together. I don't know. It wasn't that kumbaya. I think I might be like having a little bit of a nostalgic picture of it, but I remember seeing high schools on TV and being like, that looks nothing like my school.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember kind of feeling the same thing like when I was growing up as well as like I don't know if I ever saw like my reality completely reflected on TV, and especially like with shows set in cities. I was just like, there are three traffic lights here, and they only built the fourth one after X number of crashes.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So okay, so if you were so as a theater kid, I feel like we would have been friends because we always got along with the band kids, and then the band kids always played in the musical every spring. So
We never had a musical.
oh no,
Mm-mm.
I could see like I don't know if you ever ran into this, but I feel like my teachers always kind of had to bump up against this sort of like idea of what they could get around or what they could get high school kids to do. Like I always remember
Uh-huh.
having to cut certain lines from plays I was in to avoid, I guess, avoid potentially getting uh, parents upset. I remember one time I was building. It was like a Saturday. I was going in to build sets, and I had brought in a bunch of CDs, and I had a Jimmy Buffett greatest hits. And Why Don't We Get Drunk and Screw came on, and my teacher made me change it.
Wow.
At
That's
first,
so funny.
I know, and at first I thought he was joking, and then he said again, I was like, okay, I'll just put Cheeseburger in Paradise back on. Um, so, okay, so if you were in band, were you particularly what were you interested in? Because I feel like stand up is one of those unique stand up. I feel like whenever someone tells me they get into stand up really young, it's interesting to me because I didn't really know what stand up was until I was older. So, was comedy something that you were interested in younger, or did that come later?
Mostly it came later. The form it took when I was growing up was Bob and Tom radio.
Uh
I
huh.
don't know if you had access to that, but
Not at the time, but I've heard of it since.
it's I think Bob and Tom is really big in the Midwest
Mm-hmm.
and South. But basically my dad would drive me to school and I went out of district because I guess that was the clique that I was sort of in, was like I was in an immersion program, a Spanish immersion program.
Mm-hmm.
So my classmates, we had all of our like basically like there were 12 of us. Half of our day would be in Spanish, half of it in English with like the rest of the school, but
Uh
the
huh.
ones in Spanish was just us. But I had a half-hour drive to school every morning that my dad would take me to, and he would listen to Bob and Tom radio,
Mm-hmm.
which would have, a Rolodex of different comedians on.
Yeah.
And it was a very diverse group of comedians, right? It would be like Mike Birbiglia and like Nikki Glazer and then Rodney Carrington
Uh-huh.
and, Ron White and all those guys, or like
Yeah.
Alonzo Bowden one day. It was such a random mix of comedians.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my exposure to most stand up. Um, or at least like most stand up comedians, unless they were hugely famous.
Mm-hmm.
But I never went, we didn't have like a ton of live shows. Lexington was not really on the radar, except for really like like, I don't know, like nobody really came to Lexington. Everybody would go to Louisville. Nobody would
Oh,
come to
right,
Lexington.
right, right. Louisville's like the A market, and Lexington's the one that gets forgotten. No, yeah, Bob.
Yeah.
No, yeah, Bob and Tom is yeah. No, Bob and Tom's like huge in the Midwest. Like only because I was just I Henry Phillips, comedian.
Mm-hmm.
So he was telling me about when he like first started getting on Bob and Tom. That was be kind of came at the time the gateway to, okay, now you could headline these, you could get booked to calls to get these headlining gigs in like in the Midwest. So and Bob and Tom is like, that's the kind of like old school radio where like the hosts are
Yes.
like setting up the comic to do their bit about this. So
Yes.
if I put on my like my drive time DJ voice, it'd be like, all right, we got Ariel Elias on the line. How you doing, Ariel? I hear that you had an interesting gig in New Jersey recently. Tell me about that. So
Oh man, I was doing a show in South Jersey, which don't. And then we'll just go into the whole bit,
yeah,
like that's
exactly. And then I have to laugh like this, like
yeah, you have
oh
to do a really big dramatic over the top laugh.
yeah, exactly. It's like we're gonna go to commercial and we're gonna talk about Elias at the Funny Bone this Friday through Saturday. Yeah, no, I
Yes.
totally. So that's really interesting to me because that's like, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but like setting like somebody a host setting up a comic to do bits is like a probably not the most organic version of how one does comedy, but it can definitely work if you have great hosts like Bob and Tom or like uh late night like or like Conan. I think was really good at that when he would do panel interviews with comics.
Well, and of course, I had no idea that that's what was happening. I was just like,
Right.
man, these people are so funny, like right off the cuff. That's so cool. They can just have these conversations and be so funny.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that they were doing bits because I also wasn't going to their shows.
Right.
Like, they weren't coming to where I was. So it wasn't until years later that I realized that that was the case. Um, but, but yeah, I think it was like, I think that was very formative for me
Uh huh.
just to have. I remember the first time, like when I met Greg Warren in person and I told my dad, and he was like, oh, that's so cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh man, I remember I used to see Greg at the Laughing Devil all the time when I was the door guy there. I love Greg. He's
Yeah, me too.
hilarious. He's so good. Cool. So and do you remember any particular comics appearance like really sticking out to you from those formative years?
I remember Nikki Glazer had this, was on once and had this joke about trying to do a bikini wax.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was like she wanted to do like a full Brazilian and couldn't handle the pain. And so she just had two strips and it looked like a pause button on her vagina. And
Uh-huh.
she was like, that's the greatest metaphor for my sex life. And that joke to me was just like, oh my God. It was like, it was kind of dirty, but clean enough to be on the radio. I'm hearing it with my dad. But that blew my mind. Um, I remember all the Henry Phillips ones, like all the music ones stick out a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and then Mike Birbiglia he would do his like public secret or his public secret journal. He would
Mm-hmm.
like come and read those on it. So yeah, those were very big for me. I think in the way that I think I have like a little bit of an inferiority complex about people, especially comedians who grew up like knowing these specials, who like
Right.
grew up on George Carlin or like grew up on Eddie Murphy and like remember these specials, and I don't. Like I would catch Premium Blend from time to time. um I would like sometimes if I couldn't sleep, I would like catch Conan, but there was no real show for me or comedian or special that like hit hard. It was just like I grew up listening to Bob and Tom. That was my exposure to comedians, and then
Yeah.
also like we were Jewish, so we like loved Mel Brooks.
Sure.
Like that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
the and like my cousin Vinny. But that
Gotcha.
was like where I found out about comedy.
No, yeah, absolutely. So like so yeah, like and what year was this approximately?
This would have been I start like basically like 2002 through 2007.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, I remember being in high school around that time. So I remember like this was when you would get like maybe one or two Comedy Central Records albums in Target. So that's how I found out about Mitch Hedberg. And I remember seeing like flipping through and finding Comedy Central and being confused as a teenager about one person with a microphone being on stage. But I remember,
Really?
yeah, like, because there was no like bar show, there was no comedy club anywhere near where I was from, so I had like no frame of reference. It was like I was like an alien discovering this art form. The only thing I could think of that I had seen, because I remember probably the first stand up I ever saw was Jeff Foxworthy albums, because I grew up around a bunch of rednecks, so they loved Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I
Me
remember
too.
yeah, great joke writer. Like I
Yeah.
enjoy his comedy. Like if he ever played New York City, I would go see him.
All of those blue collar comedy guys, like
Hmm.
I loved them in high school.
Me
That was
too.
huge. That's who everybody loved.
Yeah, that was my touch. That was like my one connection with my dad, was that he loved Ron White. So I could kind of like I can talk to him about stand up, like, oh, like Ron White, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he also saw Jeff Dunham live. So that's his other
It's a
touchstone
whole
for
other, yeah.
for comedy. And then of course, plays very differently now, but I think the first stand up video I ever saw was probably Bill Cosby himself. Um, which obviously I feel very differently about now. But one
You're
comment,
like more of a fan now.
no, I'll put that on the record. Very much a lot less of a fan of him now. Um, but I still think about this one joke I saw from Jim David's Comedy Central presents, like maybe once a week, because I just love the verbiage of it. I'm not sure if you've run into him. I want to get him on the show so bad because I've known him for so long. But he had this bit about he was the first gay comic I'd ever seen. And he has this bit about his dad asking him, well, what do you do? And then he says, well, Dad, you know all that stuff you want Mom to do, but she won't. That's what we do. And I just thought that was like the funniest joke when I was a
That's
kid.
great.
Um,
That's such a good like economy of words joke too.
oh yeah, I love that. Like before I got into storytelling, my favorite comedians were like, how funny can you be in like the least number of words? Can you be funny in
Yeah.
like a sentence, 5 words, like that? That I just loved that. And so when you started after listening to Bob and comedians on Bob and Tom, how long after did you try stand up? Did you start in Kentucky?
No, I started in New Orleans. That's where I went to college.
Okay.
And I started my last semester of college is when I started.
Oh, okay.
Which was also it was right around when I started listening to podcasts.
uh-huh.
And um on podcasts, a big question, especially with comedians, is like how do you start? And it would be, they would say like, I just went to an open mic and I was bad for a while and, it was brutal and da da da. And I was like, oh, that's all you do? You just go to an open mic and you just do it?
Mm-hmm.
So I had a little like shitty work study job in a library,
Uh-huh.
and I was confined to myself, and I just started like writing a couple of like really stupid, dumb, but what I thought were funny ideas. And I was doing my best impression of what I thought a comedian was.
Mm-hmm.
And then looked up open mics, and there was one, 2 nights later. So I went to that.
Very cool.
And then immediately I was like, well, that was the best feeling ever, and I want to do that again.
Uh-huh. It's great. It happens so quickly, doesn't it? I remember that looking at my first open mic and going, okay, I'm gonna follow this for a good while now. So I'm guessing that first set went well then,
Yeah,
or
I
well
guess
enough.
it went well enough. I think like, in my mind, I probably at the time was like, this, I'm fucking killing. And it was probably like awkward and cringy and weird, but fun.
Mm-hmm.
And that first time you go up, you don't really have the concept of like what it looks like to fail, because you've only ever seen professional comedians doing their specials.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I could picture was that. It's not until the second time, after like having seen a full open mic, because I had never even seen live comedy before.
Yeah.
Before I did it. And then you're like, oh, this can go horribly wrong.
Right.
Oh no. not everybody's great at this. I'm not great at this.
Uh-huh.
And you still feel that like you're trying to figure out like what is funny, what is my voice, and you have to like do a bunch of like terrible jokes that
Mm-hmm.
are so cringy now. Also, this is like 2011, so like peak like Tosh.0
Right.
kind of era.
Yeah, the height of the I'm gonna say something vaguely fucked up, but I don't believe it, so it's funny kind
Right.
of operation. No, I got you. Yeah. The
Yes.
Spike TV era.
Yes, the like thank God there we were not recording our sets era.
No, yes, exactly. No, I know exactly what you mean.
Woof. But yeah, that was when I started and how I started.
Uh-huh.
And I was just like I was like immediately hooked and I was like I will let this ruin my life. Absolutely.
Oh, it's always good to realize that that's what's gonna be happening. And okay, so and this is in New Orleans, and then how long were you in New Orleans? Did you go right from New Orleans to New York?
I went right from New Orleans to New York. I started stand up in 2011 and I moved to New York in 2014.
Okay, so yeah, so so we're coming up on I guess almost nine years now of you being in New York.
Of New York. Yeah.
Very cool, very cool. Excellent. So I love talking about this as well, and I try to because I always try to glean stuff for myself from these chats. So, um, obviously, getting into moving to New York and starting to do stand up is very I think is very brutal.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know if you had this experience, but I remember even at places where I feel like very at home now. Um, there was probably maybe a couple of years before I started feeling like I wasn't like going to open mics when I started to feel like I belonged there or like I wasn't at a
Mm.
party that I was like maybe invited to or maybe it's okay I'm there. Did you have that feeling when you first got to New York?
I mean I still feel that way sometimes of like not knowing
Really?
just yeah, it's well I feel very uncomfortable in most social situations to
Mm-hmm.
begin with. But it took a long time to feel comfortable anywhere. And I remember especially having left New Orleans where I felt so at ease there, partly because like everybody's always drunk. So even if you make an ass of yourself in like an awkward social way, nobody's gonna remember.
Sure.
Or at least like that's a thing you can tell yourself. But I remember in New Orleans, like going to open mics and stuff and like knowing the bartenders and like knowing who was working. And it took so long to get to that in New York, especially because New York is huge
Yeah.
and there are so many clubs and so many bars constant like every time I would try to compile a list of like all the open mics or all the bar rooms and then by the time I mean it was just changing every week because there's just so
Yeah.
many I always felt lost and I always felt weird. um and I don't think it was until really like COVID I stayed here, and
Mm-hmm.
COVID everything became much smaller,
Yeah.
and that I think was like helped me sort of like I felt like I belonged here for the first time, and I really think it's because everybody else had left.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Or like me, I'm or was just like hiding in their apartment like during lockdown. So let me ask you about this time then because I feel like I still have to recover and get back to where I was comedically before the pandemic, and I'm just now feeling like comfortable enough to start doing that. So COVID hit. So COVID like really hits. We're on lockdown in March for several weeks in March of 2020. Uh, and my memory is that there was when summer started hitting, there was this sort of idea that maybe it was a little safer to actually go outside and like
Right.
maybe you could do something. So COVID hits. What does comedy look like for you during that like 2020 run of the height of the pandemic?
I was doing Zoom shows when there were Zoom shows, and those felt awful,
Mm-hmm.
but at least it was like something to do. And then when park shows started happening outdoors, I started doing those. And I'd like go up with a mask on and you're yelling and you're like, is this doing anything? I don't really know if we're supposed to be doing this, but it
Mm-hmm.
seems like it's okay to be outside. It's doing that. And then, yeah, I mean, it was just that for a year, really. Like, I wasn't going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't like doing anything on the road. I wasn't like, oh, well, like in Texas, everything's open, so I'll just go do stand up there. I
Right.
didn't do
Right.
that. We were pretty careful about everything. My husband's uncle died in like the first week of COVID. So
Oh, I'm
we
sorry.
also were like, thanks, but we were just like and we live in Queens where like, we heard sirens all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
we really like tried to be as cautious as possible. Um so yeah, I would do outdoor shows. I remember maybe in October of 2020, our numbers were low.
Mm-hmm.
And this was when, okay, it was like restaurants were allowed to be open at
Yeah.
a certain capacity. But nothing with entertainment was.
Right.
Um
Right.
but I remember Eastville was like, fuck it, we're like technically we're a restaurant even though we don't serve food.
Right.
So they were doing shows. I did do a few of those, and I was telling myself like, as long as our rate stays like under 3% or whatever, and I would wear a
Mm-hmm.
mask and stuff. But it was like weird. That whole time was weird, but I think it forced me to. It's like none of my material before that felt relevant anymore. It was like we're all different people now. We live in a
Yeah.
different world. Um, And doing those park shows, a lot of times one of the rules was like you weren't allowed to have an amp, like you weren't allowed to microphone, like have a mic. So I had to yell. And before COVID, I always felt like I think a way I would describe it now is I was like kind of like meek on stage a lot of times,
Mm-hmm.
and I really like I wasn't like performing my jokes, right? Like my jokes were well
Mm-hmm.
written and I would say them and they would work because they were well written enough, but
Yeah.
I wasn't like performing or putting myself into it. With COVID, doing these park shows and having to yell, it forced me to like one become like much louder and much bigger on stage, which
Right.
is still not loud or big, but it
Mm-hmm.
was more than what I was doing. But it also like we were so traumatized by living through that it also like erased a lot of the fears that I had had on stage because it was like, who cares anymore? Like people around us are dying. We're truly just like surrounded by sirens and death. So like who gives a shit if this set doesn't go well? And I think that was like very freeing for me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, kind of like when you face like because in a way I feel like a lot of us were like thinking contemplating mortality very much so. And I live in Queens too, so I remember hearing about like that hospital that just had a 18-wheeler trailer full of corpses. And I remember like walking out to the park near where I live,
Are
and
you in Astoria?
I am.
Okay, cool. So yeah,
Yeah.
me too.
Oh man. Well, man, I should have thought to ask that. Well, if you ever want to do the show again, you can just come over. We can do it. And I especially remember like hearing like the hum of like the Manhattan power plants from the park in Queens, and just being so unnerved by all of it. It was real. It was insane. And so yeah, like those park shows, those were like Stand Up New York kind of put those on, or if you.
Stand Up New York will put them on. Yeah, yeah, in every park in the city somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And then New York Comedy Club would do a rooftop show. I did that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm trying to remember where it was. Just like anywhere with outdoor space, we just took over and apologized to a bunch of parents who were there with their kids, just trying to have like a picnic.
Oh, that's amazing. Those are always the best shows when you gotta apologize for being there. But to your point about like because it sounds like this kind of taught you something about like stand up a bit. Because I like your stand up, and I agree with you. I think you're a great writer. Um, and and similar. I'm not trying to say, oh, like I'm the same as you, but
You're the same.
I remember being like a very deadpan, like monotone person on stage until I got comfortable. And then I started like, okay, maybe I don't have to like stand completely still the entire time on stage.
Yeah.
Maybe I could say the joke. And then if I do a little like, then that could get it. That's another tag.
Right. Yeah. What if I have any expression on my face at all? Wouldn't that be cool?
Uh huh.
Might that change things a bit?
Exactly. Let me. I can stretch this out a bit, and then suddenly this 4 minute bit, maybe it's 5 minutes or what have you. Because I was always very focused on how much time can I do on stage,
Sure.
and like
Still am.
yeah, and like the more time I have, the better. That means the more
Yeah.
time I can do at once. That means I'm a better comedian.
I'm still terrified every time. I'm just like, I can't fill this time. I can't do it. And then I do it, and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, no
Hmm.
problem. But every time I was just like, I don't know.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. If it gets to the point where you feel like you're just punching in for work, I would imagine that's a problem, right?
Sure. Yes.
That's
Absolutely.
yeah. I'd love to ask you this because I thought about this recently as far as something if there's something maybe you've learned about like live stand up audiences compared to what they want versus what maybe a comic thinks they should want because there's tons of like we like there's tons of stuff that like we would laugh at and think is hilarious or comedians we
The
think
darkest, most fucked up things,
right or comics that
usually.
or comics that we think are geniuses that are like not nearly as big as other comedians that maybe do something that's a little bit more I don't want to say palatable or broad, but I was just curious if you feel like you have more of an understanding between like what a live audience is looking for when they go out to see live comedy.
Um, I don't. Maybe if I did, I would be a lot more successful. I I think it so depends on every single factor in the environment,
Mm-hmm.
where you are, what club you're at, what's just happened that week in that town. Um,
Right.
I think I think also, as much as I hate to say this and as much as I hate this reality, not only are we performing for a live audience when we do these shows, we're also performing for an algorithm and
Right.
trying to find what we can clip up. So
Uh-huh.
it's, I think, when, so much of it depends. Like a live audience will, what an 8 o'clock Friday night show is looking for versus a 10 o'clock Friday night show is looking for are so different, right? Like a 10 o'clock Friday
Yeah.
night show is like hammered, um, and an 8 o'clock Friday show is like a little sleepy but fun,
Uh-huh.
you know. So it's and they're like ready for the weekend.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but basically the answer is like I have no idea what anybody wants.
I feel I kind of relate to that because I for the longest time I've never felt like I understand how to like navigate polite society or like normal people. I've always felt like this sort of like real sense of like I'm putting on a costume to get through
Mm,
social interactions.
mm-hmm.
And then when I go on stage, I feel like, well, whatever kind of odd thoughts I have or personal stories I have, I'm just going to be me, and maybe someone connects with it in some way. I've never, I can never quite wrap my head around like the idea of like what's something like very broad and maybe like relatable that I could do to a lot of normal people who have like jobs and children. If that means anything.
Yeah, even being married, you don't find that? I found that being married has made me much more relatable.
Um, if I can be I can be perfectly honest, I got married in the pandemic, like September of 2020. So I haven't even really gotten to a point where I can like talk about being where I've talked a ton about being married on stage,
Mm,
and thought of jokes that I can say that will make my wife still want to be married to me, because that's something
Sure.
I think about as well. I'm not willing to like go up there and start and blow up my marriage for the
No, no,
laugh, I
no. And you
guess.
shouldn't. I think one of my least favorite like takes on comedy is like people who hate their spouse.
Hmm.
And then like that's how they talk about it. I much prefer people who are like, these are the endearing but quirky and annoying dynamics of our relationship, and I think that's what most relationships are.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and and there's definitely a lot of that in my relationship as well. Because the truthful thing is, I don't hate my spouse. I love her very much. Has made, and she'll tell you this too. I'm not coming out left field. She has made my life and me as a person infinitely better than before. Like I was struggling just in a lot of
yeah.
different ways. Yeah, and
How
then
has she made your life better? Will, tell me about your wife.
well,
Let's see if we can work out a bit.
okay, let's. I'm willing to. I'm down. So first off, she's, I'm very like very much like not a. I'm very like a type B kind of like go with the flow kind of person. She's very type A. Like she's the communications director for a retail the retail and wholesale department store union. So she's very like driven kind of person who's like gets told she can't do something and then just like wrings the neck out of it until it happens. And so I've learned a lot of those like important like all these guests I've gotten. I just reach out to people. Like I would have been afraid to reach out to people to talk to me uh be beforehand, and as far as like thinking about relationships as like an equal partnership is something like, and like communicating like in a emotionally mature way instead of just kind of like shutting down and being defensive. Like I say how I feel a lot of times now. Like I feel this way for this specific reason, and this is why. That's a lot of what I think of how I've improved. Like I had terrible day jobs for the longest time, and now my day job is vaguely related. It's in my day job is in podcasting. Would have never thought I could do that before she just hammered it into me over and over and over again that it's possible.
Isn't that so nice when someone's just like, you don't have to live like this?
Yes,
And you're like, yeah, I
exactly.
guess I don't.
Yeah,
It
and
never occurred to me.
I know, and for the longest time I was like, no, I must suffer. If I'm not suffering, then I can't be funny anymore. And that's very not true. So like a lot of just kind of realizing like a lot of things that I thought were the way to do it are not the way to navigate something. And then I'm still stubborn as hell, so it takes me a couple times for before I actually say, "Oh, let me try it her way," and then it always
Can I
works.
give you a writing exercise if you want to make this a bit?
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Make
please do.
um make a list of all of the things that you used to do and without her, and then a list of the things that you do now because of her. And you'll see the like the the contradictory, like once you really get into the details of like the idiot things that you used to do,
Hmm.
like you'll find some funny shit in there.
Thank you. I will absolutely do that. That's
Was
I've
that so condescending? I'm sorry.
no, this is great. This is really great stuff because like I because I respect you as a comedian, so I appreciate this. I don't feel condescended to at all. And this is again
Okay,
also part of all this emotional maturity I have now.
great.
um, so let me ask you. So I let me ask you a little bit this about like the recent bump that you've had in your career because of this video, and I'm happy for you that it's happening. I wish it could have happened without
Thanks, me too.
without you getting a beer can chucked at you.
Yeah,
Um,
I appreciate that.
so I won't ask you to tell the entire story. Like people can Google, but I just kind of want to ask you about kind of like the aftermath of this situation. So for anyone who's listening to this, you were performing in New Jersey, and you had a table of hecklers, and a guy chucks a full can of beer at you while you're on stage.
Yeah.
And in a and a move that's universally acclaimed, you pick up as they're getting kicked out finally. You pick up the beer and chug it.
Yeah.
And then and so this video, and so I wanted to ask you this. So people start sharing this video everywhere. Jimmy Kimmel retweets it, and then you tweet to him, "Can I make my late night debut on your show?" And then he says yes, and then you were on the show pretty soon after that, right?
Yeah, it was so they were on hiatus like
Uh-huh.
that week, and then the following week I was on.
Okay. So did you just have like a week to write a late night set, or did you have like the 5 minute late night set, like the idea of what it would be? How did you go
Yeah,
about
I mean,
preparing that?
that was not my first time trying to get on late night. So I had submitted tapes before to a different show and a different
Okay.
booker who their loss. Um because they passed. So I already like had more or less like a pretty decent idea of the jokes that I wanted, because that had been getting a late night set on TV had been like a goal of mine for like a realistic goal of mine for a couple of years that I was like working towards.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got the yes, it was like, okay, cool. And they said like send us a tape. But I just like reached out to a couple of clubs. Gotham was like, come run it as many times as you want. I went, I recorded one set, I sent it to them. They were like, it's a little too long. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think I was coming in at like 5:20. So I cut a joke, I sent it back, and then they were like, okay, great. And that was it. So it's like, it's not as if I asked to be on and then was like, oh no. It was
Right,
like, I
right.
asked to be on because this is a thing I've been ready for. And have just been overlooked because that's how this industry works sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, I'm usually pretty good about knowing what opportunities I'm ready for and what I'm not ready for. So I asked for this because I knew I was ready for it.
Mm-hmm. And this was like the absolute opportunity. And like, if my favorite quote about luck is that it's just preparation meets opportunity. So like you are
Sure.
prepared, and then of course the opportunity comes flinging at your head, and then it's ready. You're ready to capitalize on it. Um,
Well, what I used to always do when I moved to New York, and when we were talking about being lost and feeling overwhelmed, being in the city, is when I would try to figure out what shows to ask to be on, I would go and look at lineups, and I would be like, am I funnier than half the people on here? Or am I better at this than half the people on here?
mm-hmm.
And if I wasn't, then I was like, okay, I'm not ready to ask to be on this show. Like when I first moved here, I wasn't going to ask to be like on Cabin or like,
Sure.
or or Cobra Club or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's like a similar thing with like late night. It was like, well, I think I'm funnier than a lot of people who have been on late night.
Uh-huh.
Like, so I think I'm ready for this.
That's I might start looking at things that way, because that's kind of like uh, that's a realistic way of approaching this. Because I remember I used to get like, because I would just kind of like blanket ask whoever shows at a certain point, just like cast a real wide net. And after I got hurt by a couple of friends, like I was like, oh, I'm friends with this person, I'll probably get on. And then it's like, well, this is like the show that I need famous people with credits on.
Right.
And then if you dive into podcasting. Uh, but no, that's a really healthy way. But no, that's a great way of looking at that. So as part of my reentry program back into stand up,
Yeah.
I'm going to start approaching it that way. Awesome. I am getting so much out of this conversation, Ariel. I really appreciate it. And so Kimmel hits, and then how soon after that did like, because like I love that you're getting like a lot of road work now. How soon after the Kimmel set airing did this kind of start happening? You start doing all this road work.
It started at the end of December.
Mm-hmm.
And I should say, I'm now getting all this road work headlining. Before that, I was getting a lot of road work featuring.
Uh huh.
So I am like a road dog in the sense that like whatever that term, like I love being on the road.
Uh huh.
I love driving long distances. I love a hotel room. I love I just love that life.
Yeah.
Um, I love coming home. Like I love like if you don't leave, you never get to come home. I love the act of coming home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so So like the switch from featuring to headlining started like late December.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I mean, before all of this, I was not repped. I had a manager before we parted ways, like in June,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had never had an agent. When the clip went viral, I got a number of managers that had reached out to me and one agent. And then so that was like like if the Kimmel set had never happened, I still was like, okay, I will have representation from this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then yeah, and then they started booking me for starting in late December.
Very cool. I love that this.
Sorry, my
Oh,
dog's barking.
it's okay. I just have a few more things, and then I'll leave you to it. I really I'm so glad that out of this this situation that it has allowed you to propel into this next level of this ridiculous of this thing. But I love that. I love that you were doing the road heavily beforehand, because like that's what I think a lot of the job is going out and learning how to be funny in front of this city and this city and these kinds of folks. That to me is where the fun of it fun of it is learning how to be funny around in front of anyone.
Yeah, it's like learning how to be funny in front of all these people, and also learning how to bomb in front of all these people, right? Learning how to like take it on the chin when they hate you.
Uh-huh.
Which I think is a
Right.
lot of it.
And how do you do that? What keeps you coming back after like you just bombed for a feature set or maybe a headlining set? What gets you through that pit in your stomach feeling and then gets you on to the next gig?
You just go like, all right, that sucked. Am I gonna die? No.
No.
I'll be fine tomorrow. I think also the more you do it and the longer you do it, the quicker, like it still hurts. It hurts the same every time,
Mm-hmm.
right? People like the rejection will always feel like awful. If it doesn't feel awful, you need to talk to a therapist. Like if you
Right.
you're becoming numb, that is a bigger problem.
Yeah.
What you get better at and what you learn to do is to like let it not affect you for as long.
Right.
So it's like the feelings are still there. I still want to cry every time everybody hates me. It's just that you get much better at like, when you first start, especially when you're not doing as many sets, like that hurts and that lingers for like days.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I don't know, by the next morning I'm fine, usually. And even sometimes, I mean, in New York, you're like, all right, well, that sucked, but I have 3 more sets tonight.
Yeah, exactly. I have so many more opportunities to keep working on this.
Right. And like, why didn't they? Like, you get better. I never really know what an audience wants, but I am decent at figuring out why they didn't want me.
Exactly. I know exactly what you mean. Like how can I like I got to I got to reword this so that in my cases I got to reword this so I'm less of an asshole up front.
Some of it's like I have to reword this, or like I wasn't present and I was just punching in. Some of it is like, oh, I saw who they did like. I'm fine. I don't need to change anything.
Yeah, exactly. Last thing I'll ask you before we get out here. I like to manifest things on the show sometimes. Now that you're doing now that we're bumping up to headliner, what's the next thing you would like to make, whether it's comedy related or some other form of creativity? What is something you haven't done yet you want to do?
2 things. A podcast.
Nice.
Sorry to throw my hat in the ring, but I do want to do that. And a special. Like I want a special. I want to at least have it recorded at the end of this year. Sooner if I'm doing like longer weekends.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now it's still like it is a lot of one-nighters,
Uh-huh.
and it's still like not every weekend, but yeah, that's what I want
Very
this year.
very cool. Is that kind of how it works? Like you start with like the one night, and then we work up to the full weekends at clubs.
Yeah, it's the whole thing. But it's like if I wanted to do smaller rooms, I could do full weekends. But trying to do bigger rooms
Mm-hmm.
because they don't know me, and to them, I came out of nowhere, even though I've been working on it for a long time.
Of course.
It's a lot of like middle of the week one nighter, and you're like, okay. But I think they figure like it's not a risk for them to give you that night.
Sure.
And if you can do well on that night, then you'll definitely do well on a weekend. So,
Got it. Well, I look forward to seeing this special. And if you ever have any questions about podcasting, not that I not that I consider myself an authority. I like talking about it, so I like to help people. So I'm
yeah, well, and
available.
now that I know we're Astoria neighbors, it
Yeah,
changes everything, man.
exactly. 100% it does. Very available, and I appreciate the time. Is can we plug some dates before we get out here?
Yes, absolutely. When does this come out?
This will be out next Monday. So if it's third now, so this will be I guess the 9th or 10th.
Okay. I will be okay, May 9th, Philadelphia. May 20th, Indianapolis, Indiana. I just posted, and then I have like some West Coast dates in June. Some like, um, I'll be at Magoobies in like June 22nd or whatever. All my dates are. You can follow me on everything at Ariel_comedy. And you can see all of my dates there, or just go to my website. It's arieleliascomedy.com.
Cool, and I'll put that in the description so people can just
Cool.
click right there and go buy tickets. And thank
Thanks, man.
you so much for talking to me. This was really nice. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
this is great. Thanks.
Going viral doesn't guarantee you success, but for hardworking, talented people, it is sometimes in this day and age the boost that is needed to really crank things up. And Ariel is funny enough and talented enough to keep that train going. So I can't wait to see what she does next. And I personally got a lot out of this conversation. I am inspired after this, and these are the kinds of conversations that really uh, may remind me of why I love comedy and why I love stand up. So, folks, you should go to arieleliascomedy.com. The link is in the description of this podcast. You can check out where Ariel's shows are, all our social medias there. You can sign up for the mailing list because that's one of the best way for artists to be in contact with their fans and let them know when they're going to be in their city, so you don't find up that you missed it from a post a few days after the show happens. And I appreciate all of you for being here. That's our show for today. If you enjoyed this podcast and think you know a friend who would be interested as well, you can send them to awesomedisaster.com. That has got links to everywhere you can get the show. We are on Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. And if you want to give us some assistance, you can hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcasts and let people know this is a cool show for cool people. If you want to go a little bit further in your support of the show, you can go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/awesomedisaster. Got a lot of stuff on there that I don't post anywhere else. And we also have a merch store as well. And again, the link is at awesomedisaster.com. I'm on Instagram at WillCarry23, at Comic Will Carry on Twitter, and still the proud owner of at Will Carry on Hive. So thank you all again so much for being here. I hope you find some joy. Hope you find some excellence in the little moments of your day. So, and I hope that I'm appreciative to be a part of that day. So, thank you all again so much for being here, and I will see you next time between awesome and disaster. Stay safe, get vaccine boosted, and stomp out fascism. Take care, everybody.